Hi, everyone. It was, in the end, a stunning verdict. A Santa Maria jury finds Michael Jackson not guilty on each and every charge he faced. No compromises, no hung jury. It seems no second thoughts. A jury of 8 women and 4 men found there just wasn't enough evidence to put Jackson behind bars. Leaving after the verdict, he seemed to be a shell of the man who danced on the SUV at the outset of this case. So here now, a look back at how it happened.
We, the jury in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of conspiracy as charged in count 1 of the indictment, not guilty of a lewd act upon a minor child, not guilty of administering an intoxicating agent to assist in the commission of a felony.
Obviously, we're disappointed in the verdict, but we work every day in a system of justice. We believe in the system of justice. And I've been a prosecutor for 37 years, and in 37 years I've never quarreled with a jury's verdict, and I'm not going to start today.
You mentioned the celebrity factor. Do you think that's played a key part?
Well, it seems to us for explanations in the wrong places. I don't know.
What mother in her right mind would allow that to happen, or just freely volunteer your child, to sleep with someone, and not just so much Michael Jackson, but any person for that matter.
We looked at all the evidence. We looked at Michael Jackson, and one of the first things we decided that we had to look at him as just like any other individual, not just as a celebrity. And once we got that established, that we could go beyond that, we were able to deal with it just as fairly as we could with anybody else.
We actually challenged one another in the deliberation room. I mean, it wasn't, I don't want to give the impression that this was a really slam dunk deal where you just go in to a room and 12 people agree. I don't think 12 people can agree on anything except that the sun might come up tomorrow morning. And beyond that, you got to talk about it. And we did talk about it. We challenged the issues, and we came to the decision that pointed to reasonable doubt.
In the last few weeks, a large amount of ugly, malicious information has been released into the media about me. Apparently, this information was leaked through transcripts in a grand jury proceeding, where neither my lawyers nor I ever appeared. The information is disgusting and false. Years ago, I allowed a family to visit and spend some time at Neverland. Neverland is my home. I allowed this family into my home because they told me their son was ill with cancer and needed my help. Through the years, I have helped thousands of children who were ill or in distress. These events have caused a nightmare for my family, my children, and me. I never intend to place myself in so vulnerable a position ever again. I love my community, and I have great faith in our justice system. Please keep an open mind and let me have my day in court. I deserve a fair trial like every other American citizen. I will be acquitted and vindicated when the truth is told. Thank you.
That you can give me within the same. everybody, and thank you for joining us here tonight for King Jordan Radio. It is a very special King Jordan Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the 10-year anniversary of MJ being found not guilty. Tonight on the show, we will have, well, at least we are scheduled to have William Wagner, Geraldine Hughes, YouTube sensation Nicole and Scotty, bodyguard Terry Anderson, Mike Garcia, and Tom Mesereau. Let's bring in one of our guests who seems to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, she wrote the book on the 93 case. I have 2661 numbers. I'm going to trust my instinct and go to this one. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very first guest to the show, Miss Geraldine Hughes. Let me let her in.
Hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful,
How are you?
Wonderful. I'm just
Everything
fine,
is good?
and I'm just honored. Oh, everything is fine. I'm so glad that you're doing this show and to be a part of it.
Why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself before we proceed?
Yes, I'm Geraldine Hughes. I'm the author of Redemption, The Truth Behind the Michael Jackson Child Molestation Allegation. I'm from 1993. I played a role in 1993 where I was an eyewitness, not to anything of Michael's wrongdoing. I was an eyewitness to the extortion of Michael Jackson that launched the false allegation. And I decided somewhere along the way that, you know, when Michael settled the case and the truth never came out, because what was really going on in my law office where I worked for the attorney, who was the father of Evan, who was the father of the first accuser, Jordy Chandler, I knew I had information that no one else knew, that this was an extortion case that just didn't go his way. And so the allegation was launched to get back at Michael and to get the money a different way, through the court system. And I believe that, it's information that everybody needs to know. So I wrote a book called Redemption. And in the book, it's a lot of it tells the true story about what really happened in 1993. I think it's really important for people to know that, that trial had a lot to speak towards Michael's innocence, because if Michael was truly a child molester, he would not have walked out of the courthouse that day. That prosecutor, Tom Snedden, tried everything in his power, within his power and within powers that be, to really bring a conviction. But because Michael was innocent, completely innocent, that's the reason he walked out of the courtroom. And I think that's why it's so important for people to know the truth. And the truth was that Michael Jackson was never a child molester. Michael Jackson was the victim of an extortion scheme. And the only place that you're going to find the true story, it needed to be told by someone who was there. I was there. I worked for the attorney that was involved in this whole scheme. And so that's the role that I played. I decided to let the world know through my book what really happened in 1993, because what the prosecutor tried to do with that trial was to come and say he did it again, even though a child molester does not strike once every 10 years. Come on, the statistics are not, they don't valid. But he was trying to say it anyway. So let's just say that's what. See, when I came out with my book came out to say, he didn't do it in the first place. So where do you come with this again at? He didn't do it the first time. So You know, so I'm sure you guys are going to learn a lot. This program is so important. People need to understand why Michael walked out of that courtroom. Not because he had great attorneys, although he did have a great one, and he's going to be on the program. Oh, he had an angel sent from heaven, you know, that really was able to put that case in its proper perspective. But Michael walked out of that courtroom because he was innocent.
I totally agree with you. Now, for the audience, if you want to, if I pick you out now and you want to talk to Geraldine, you can talk to the other guests later on tonight, just so you know. Okay, Geraldine, did you cover the 2005 trial?
Oh, I was covering it. Everybody else was watching the news. So I can honestly say that if you were watching the news about the trial, you weren't getting correct information. That's why when they exonerated him at the end, a lot of people were surprised. The only way that you could really know what was going on in that courtroom, we were actually reading the transcripts every day. We had fans that were pulling the transcripts and we were reading them. And what was actually going on inside the courtroom was totally different than what they were reporting on the news. On the inside of the courtroom, Michael Jackson was winning that case from the very first prosecution witness. And that is so highly unlikely. Usually the defendant don't start winning until they start putting on their case, their defense, you know. But Michael was winning that case from the very first prosecution witness that was just totally being discredited. You know, they weren't what they were saying against him was not validated. By the time Mesro got to him, they almost couldn't put two words together, you know, of credibility. And then one interesting thing that the prosecutor did, he withheld his star witness almost till the end, which was the accuser's mom, the one that, you know, that made the first allegation, you know, that brought the allegation of her son being molested by Michael, because he knew that once she got on the stand, all credibility was going to be thrown out the window anyway. So it wasn't really until she hit the stand that it became quite clear to just about anybody that was watching that, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this case. So yes, I followed it all the way to the last dove flew up in the air when they exonerated him.
Yes, indeed. Let's play some of the news outlets, what they were saying around that time, and I'm looking for the Debbie Rowe testimony. Let's see if I have it. Let's go to Chris Tucker's testimony.
Out of the Michael Jackson trial, as we've been reporting, the defense rested on Wednesday, and the case is expected to go to the jury next week. So the defense rested. It called 50 witnesses in 15 days, finishing up with comedian Chris Tucker, who basically claimed that he was nervous about this family, that he referred to the boy in his wheedling, cunning ways. A big success for the defense?
He gave the defense exactly what they needed. There have been some witnesses who come forward who we thought were going to provide the defense with more. Chris Tucker gave them exactly what they needed, which is that he knew this boy, the accuser. He knew the mother. And you know what? He didn't trust them from day one. And he's not just talking about the mother, because there have been a lot of witnesses who come forward and said, this mother, all she wanted was money, she was trouble. This is a witness who's coming forward and saying, even the boy himself was cunning. Even the boy himself was always asking for money. And that's the theory of the defense here.
Overall, assess the case put forth by Tom Mesereau and his team.
I think it was a good case. The defense presented, I think, a pretty strong case. In many of these cases, we don't see any defense at all. We see a couple of witnesses come forward. Here you had witnesses who said, this accuser, this mother, cannot be trusted. And remember, that's the heart of the case. The heart of this case is, do you believe the boy who's making these accusations? Do you believe his brother, who says that he saw molestation? And do you believe this mother, that they were all confined at the Neverland home? I think for the prosecutors, the key is looking at the big picture, saying, there's a pattern here. This is not just about this boy. It's not just about this family. This is the M.O. for Michael Jackson, and this is just one in a series of events.
And in fact, another boy came forward, right, which could be the most damaging witness of all.
And I think that there have been a number of other cases, and the prosecution wants to put that into perspective. The defense, on the other hand, wants this jury to just look at this family. Look at the mother. She can't be trusted.
Finally, acquittal or conviction? What do you think?
There's no question that it's more likely there'll be an acquittal than a conviction. Could be a hung jury, could be some sort of compromise, but if you're the prosecutor, I think you've got to be nervous.
Okay, the audio was courtesy of Luna Joe, 67. Let's thank her for that. Geraldine, what do you make of the coverage that they were talking about Chris Tucker being a good witness? He was the final witness.
Oh, he was the final. See, my memory is not that clear on Chris, what his testimony was. I don't think it was that. Chris.
It was favorable for Michael. Let's put it that way.
It was favorable for Michael, yeah. But it's just I'm not crystal clear. I almost can't give a good answer here because it's been a few years.
So.
It's been 10 years.
It's been a decade.
The ones that were more memorable for me were actually Deborah Rowe was a very memorable witness for me. And something else that was memorable, too, was the fact that the prosecutor called, they were allowed to bring in evidence from 1993, which was that was unethical all by itself. I don't know how they allowed that to happen.
That.
Well, they usually don't bring, in 1993, he was never charged. How are you going to bring in information from a possible trial, not a trial, but a possible trial? He was never convicted in 93, so how was he allowed? The court system was not working, was not working in his favor that they allowed it, but they wound up bringing in witnesses from 1993, but guess what? They brought the mother of the 13-year-old, but guess who they didn't seem to bring in? They didn't bring in the 13-year-old. Well, he wasn't 13 at the time, but why would you bring in the mother? If you really want to nail your case, why did you not bring in the first accuser? He had subpoena power. He could have done it, and we were real clear as to why he didn't do it. We had been hearing reports that boy, now an adult, is finally telling the truth that Michael never did anything to him. It hit the internet. It was all over the place on the internet, and we believe with all our heart that the prosecutor had a reason why he didn't bring in the first accuser, because he was now telling people that Michael did not really molest him.
That is very accurate. Let me bring in, I think we have the bodyguard from Michael Jackson. He stayed with him throughout the trial in 2005. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. He is a former LAPD sergeant, and he was a bodyguard for Michael Jackson from 2004 to 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Terry Anderson. Good evening, Terry, and welcome to King Jordan Radio.
Hi, Jordan. How are you?
Okay, you're on the phone with Geraldine Hughes and myself on exactly 10 years ago, where Michael was acquitted. Your thoughts?
Well, thank God Michael was acquitted. First of all, Jordan, there's some kind of feedback. It's kind of an echo thing going on, but I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
I can hear you. We're working on that as we speak.
Okay. So thank God justice prevailed, and Mr. Jackson was acquitted. I firmly believe that the decisions were made. I think when I say thank God the judicial system worked, it kind of worked, because it didn't seem to work throughout the trial. Some of the over-prosecution and just the, I think some of the judges, not the judges, but I think the judge as well as the prosecuting people, Snedden and his group, they overstepped their bounds, they abused their authority, and but ultimately the jurors listened very attentively and they came out with the right decision, thank God.
I totally agree with you on that point. Geraldine, what's your thoughts?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What is your thought of what
I'd like to say hello to Mr. Anderson. How are you? I'm honored to be on with you again.
Oh, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank God for you, someone that worked closely with Michael. But I totally agree with what he's saying, that, a lot of, the justice system had no choice but to exonerate him. It's just my only issue is that, they just weren't, they weren't giving us a real picture of what was going on inside the courtroom. Everybody was racing. We even heard that they had planned, if Michael Jackson was convicted, they already had plans. They were planning to make millions of dollars covering him being in jail, all kind of thing, craziness that was going on. And I'm just really glad. But like I said, they put so much into trying to convict him, 10 bogus charges, that you're doing a lot to try and convict someone. And the mere fact that he walked out there, not even at the very tail end of the trial, they even threw in a misdemeanor, like as if to tell the jury, well, if you can't convict him on these 10 bogus felony here, at least, give him something, slap his hand. They didn't even buy that. They didn't even buy that. And I tell people, and I keep telling people, the reason why he wasn't convicted was because he was not guilty.
Yeah. I echo those same thoughts. For them to throw in that additional charge at the end, I've had over 20 years in law enforcement, and a part of law enforcement is attending court and going through the seeing arrestees go through the judicial system. I've never seen that in 20 years of law enforcement, and some of the other things. That's why I said, thank God the judicial system ultimately worked, but there was some prosecutorial, just nightmare stuff going on as it relates to Judge Melville allowing certain things, and Tom Stetton and his crew doing certain things. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen nothing like that in my life.
Well, even in '93, they tried to. They allowed some things in '93. These are some of the things that I articulate in my book, Redemption. They allowed, one of the things that was unprecedented was they allowed the father to file a civil trial while they were still an ongoing criminal investigation. That was unprecedented. Usually, you have to exonerate if you're going to come after somebody criminally, that has to conclude before you come. And we see it all the time, just like in the OJ. They tried him. He was found not guilty. Well, right after that not guilty verdict, the family came in with a civil lawsuit. That's the order of things, because the standards that apply towards civil are lesser than criminal. Criminal has a higher bar, but the fact that they allowed the father to sue him to file that criminal lawsuit civil lawsuit while that criminal investigation, the prosecutor just needed to sit back, and he was able to gain access to information that he could not have gotten criminally under the criminal standards. You know what I'm saying? So that was unprecedented. There was a lot of stuff that went on.
Kerry, I want you to take the audience back to June 13th, 10 years ago exactly today, and remind the audience what it was like when you got the call that the verdict was in. Can you go through detail and explain to my audience how that took place and your role in it?
Well, the interesting thing is I was supposed to get a call from Tom Mesereau, and we had anticipated a certain time, so I hadn't heard from him. And I know on a couple of other occasions they tried to trip Mr. Jackson up. So anyway, when I didn't get the call from Tom Mesereau, I called him, and he said no, he had just left the court area, and the verdict wasn't in yet. So myself and my security team was on a stand down at Neverland. We were standing by because we only had like a 45-minute drive to the actual court to get there. And the interesting thing is, as we're standing by, one of Michael's dear cousins who lived at the ranch, Levon, came in and said, Kerry, what are you guys doing? The verdict is in. I said, no, I just talked to Tom Mesereau, and no, the verdict is not in. He just told me. So anyway, I called Tom Mesereau, and he walks back over to the court, and he said, in fact, it was in. So they had been really on us real hard about being able to respond within a timely manner, but yet and still, I had to learn from some kid that was, Michael's cousin, and I really trusted what he said because I knew how he cared for Michael. But he was at the front gates at Neverland, and he came down and told me. That's how I actually got my notification. Tom Mesereau went over to the court, and they did confirm that the verdict was in. So I guess the clock was running on our 40-minute estimated time of arrival. Anyway, I immediately went over to Mr. Jackson's room, and Grace, Paris, Jackson were in the room. Prince was in the room, and it was kind of a very upsetting thing because I told him it was the verdict time, and Grace escorted the children out, and Mr. Jackson was very, very upset. He was in a bad mental state, as I can only imagine, because at that particular time he didn't know or have too much faith in the judicial system, and he didn't really know whether he was going to be a free man or not. So I just reassured him through my Christian beliefs, and we just got to have faith, and like I did all throughout the trial. But what was really a turning point in his emotion, I told him, I had told him earlier about the death threats on him, and I had to make him wear a bulletproof vest. And when I put that vest over his shoulders, that's when he really broke down. The vest was not that heavy. It was actually a vest. It was my wife's bulletproof vest when she was a police officer, but it was brand new. I put it on him, and he basically dropped to his knees, not from the weight of the actual vest, but just from all the emotion. And I guess it was so real then at that time. On top of all of this stuff, he had to deal with somebody, even if he was acquitted, somebody wanting to blow his brains out, either, right after we walked out, because that was the actual threat if he was. Oh, absolutely. That was the actual threat, and it was a viable threat. So finally I just picked him up physically, picked him up off the ground, and it was so sad because he was just mentally just out of it. He knew what was going on. He was very alert, but he was just, you can imagine being in a situation like that, being one of the most famous persons in the world, and being able to provide for your family and your employees and for others, being the great humanitarian. Now you're going to jail for the rest of your life, So you can only imagine the emotional stress that was on him on top of everything else.
You can hold that thought, Terry, for 1 second. I'd like to introduce, he's an advocate for Michael Jackson. He's been covering the Michael Jackson trial from the get-go. Ladies and gentlemen, making his debut on the King Jordan radio show, Mr. William Wagner. Good evening, William, and welcome to King Jordan Radio. You're on the line with bodyguard Kerry Anderson and Miss Geraldine Hughes. How are you?
I'm doing Mr. good. Wagner. I just left. Hello, Geraldine. I've had Geraldine on my TV show a long time ago about her wonderful book, Redemption, and I don't think I've had Mr. Anderson on, but I did talk to Mr. Anderson when I was in Europe a year or two ago, and I just left Timberland Bait, a place I'm sure Mr. Anderson is more than familiar with. Lisa Breezy, who came out with her own book here just recently, is there, and a gal named Dee Garcia, who's from Chicago, and her husband Raul. I just promised to meet them there. But yeah, that trial never should have happened because they had no credible evidence at all.
Absolutely. And William, I want to get to your story in just a second, but I just want Kerry to finish up on what he was talking about, and then we'll go to you. Your story about how you got involved. So, Kerry, if you can, please.
Okay, so now Michael's lying down. He's not lying down. He's basically kneeling down just from the weight of all the world on his shoulders. And like I said, I had to put that bulletproof vest on him. Time was of the essence. We had to get to the actual court because they had actually started the clock on us. And I picked him up, and I actually physically had to hold him up, and I said a prayer, and I assured him that, you know what, we are going to be back in this room within 3 or 4 hours. And I was also counting on the actual verdict being read and it's coming out in a favorable way to him. And I reassured him that we were going to be fine. And that was the only thing that I knew how to do. I didn't know how much I really believed that, but something told me inside that we were going to be fine and he was going to be fine and he'd be back at home with his children. And only at that point he rose up and looked me right in the eyes, and we walked out of the room when we got him all dressed up and everything, and that was it. We got in the cars, and it was a very, very emotional ride to the court. I think Mrs. Jackson, Reby, Randy, and Joe were in the car with me and Michael, and it was a mess. I'll go into it a little bit later on as it relates to the ride to and from, actually. But we went into court, and Michael was a mess. Everybody in the car was a mess, basically. And we finally arrived at the court, and you know, everybody saw the video of us getting out, and Michael went into basically a restroom right before going in. And it was interesting, that video. I watched one of Luna Joe's videos. Who's a very good friend of mine. She's awesome in terms of her investigative reporting and everything. But I was watching one of her videos this morning, and I never will forget how right before Michael and I walked into court, he paused as if, I'm not going in here. It's like, oh, my God, come on, dude. We got to go in here and get this verdict. Don't run on me now, you know. But I'm sure he was going through all kind of emotions. He broke down again. It was only he and I in the bath. What?
Who wouldn't be?
Oh, I know.
Going through all
I
kinds
always would try to give him in words of encouragement and tell him actually how strong I believed he was, because, you know, I'm dealing with personal problems, and like probably all of your listeners, there's always some kind of affliction or storm in life that you have to deal with. But the true test of a person, a man or a woman, and their character is, what are you going to do when it's not good? And I told him all along, man, you talk about strength. You are strong, you know, to be going through all of this crap and it to be so public. You know, if somebody said, okay, King Jordan got a ticket at a red light, that's no big deal. But when somebody says Michael Jackson did it, it's all over every newspaper, every article, and it's just so public. So, yeah, he's the greatest entertainer of all times. I believe that, but you know, it goes with the territory. When the media is trying to bring you down or present you in a certain way, it's going to go bad for you worldwide. You know, so that was that even exacerbated all of the emotional things that he dealt with. But that was interesting when we went through the magnetometers to get searched, and right before we walked into the courtroom, you can look at the videos. You saw him pause, and then he turned around. I was like, oh, my God, what are you doing? You know, but we went on in, and thank God the verdicts came out like I anticipated them coming out, and he was a free man, thank God. But it was, you know, just to keep things brief, because I could go on and on and on. But that was that. We listened to the verdict, and then obviously exited the court. That was all on tape. And it was another emotional ride going home, but that's it in a nutshell.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable set of circumstances. Now, William, you uncovered some prosecutorial misconduct as far as fingerprints. Why don't you tell my audience about that? The fact that you found out that Tom Sneddon was falsifying evidence. Can you explain that to my audience?
Yeah, the network media never even mentioned, even slightly, this issue. And I believe Thomas Hurricane Mesereau understood this was falsified fingerprints, but it didn't really matter because the fingerprints was on a magazine that had not been printed at the time the boys claimed they were molested, or even at the time they were last at Neverland when Michael wasn't even there with them. So it didn't really matter. But what happened is once they booked Michael, they had his fingerprints on glass. They do it digitally on glass nowadays, not on paper. Once they have your fingerprints digitally, it can be recreated and planted on almost anything you want. The problem was there was one part of the print. You have to have, I forget if it's 5 or 7 points on the fingerprint that match. And there were one curlicue point short of having a match. But that could only have been done by 3 or 4 people who do the fingerprinting on that week that Michael was booked into custody. So you not only have the prosecutors fabricating evidence, you have a felony conspiracy by the fingerprinting sheriff's deputy as well as the prosecutors to plant his fingerprints on a magazine that had not been printed at the time the boys were last at Neverland. How strange is that?
Very strange indeed.
And I presented an affidavit. I presented an affidavit to the county supervisors on August 14th, 2012, just a couple of weeks before I left to go to Europe to meet fans and tell them the truth of the details of the trial that the BBC and other media never told them. They just didn't give them any of the real details. And this was one of the important details. There were other important details as well. But I was dumbfounded at how hard the media tried to cover up the details that absolutely exonerated Michael, while at the same time playing up that, Michael's going to go to jail, Michael's going to go to prison. And Mesereau was alarmed as well and said so on my TV show I did with Mesereau on December 10th, 2005, which is free to anybody to view on my YouTube channel. Just put in Tom Mesereau, William Wagner interview. You can find part 1 through 7. It's there for anybody to see at no charge, no fee. It was this Mike, Tom Mesereau, Thomas Hurricane Mesereau, came in like a strong, steady wind, and he just blew away all the crap that the prosecutors had hammered together makeshift fashion to try to make Michael look guilty. And I said to the supervisors on August 14th, you need to appoint a special prosecutor to indict Tom Snedden, who was still alive at that time. He died this past November 1st, the day after Halloween, kind of appropriate. And he died rather painfully. He was not a happy camper at the end of his life, and I'm not shedding any tears. But his accomplices, Gordy Auchincloss, Ron Zonin, Meg Nicola, these 3 junior punks of the district attorney's office, they could still be indicted and should, because they committed fraud on the court. And when you commit fraud on the court, until that's dealt with and brought up properly in the proper legal fashion, the statute of limitations doesn't run. They could still be indicted, even though Snedden's already gone to hell to pay for his crimes. The other 3, and the people who helped fabricate the evidence, and Janet Arvizo should have gone to prison. In fact, I was the one that got Janet Arvizo arrested after the trial. I called the DA in Los Angeles and called, and he didn't seem very interested in prosecuting Janet Arvizo. So I called a few Michael Jackson fans and said, would you help me? This is the DA's private cell number. Call him. This wasn't the chief DA. This was a middle-level district attorney in Los Angeles. I said, call him and tell him the evidence that Janet Avizio committed felony welfare fraud was brought out and nailed down in the Michael Jackson trial, and it's all a matter of record. All you have to do is bring up the record, arrest her, indict her, and put her in prison for felony welfare fraud. Because she had bamboozled J.C. Penney out of lots of money. I don't remember whether it was $70,000 or $100,000, just to go away, because she claimed, and Mesereau brought this up, Mesereau and Susan Yu were the most prepared defense attorneys I have ever witnessed, and I've witnessed at least 500 trials in 32 different states. That's what I do. I document our rotten, stinking injustice system in America, getting worse every year. That's what I do. Anyway, Mesereau really nailed it. He just came in like a strong, steady wind, like a hurricane, till he blew away all the crap and the bare naked truth that this talented, charitable, kind, and loving gentleman who graced Santa Barbara County by moving here, improving Sycamore Valley Ranch into Neverland, and letting hundreds and hundreds of children come out and enjoy it free of charge. It's better than Disneyland. You don't need a ticket to get in. You don't have to pay for any food while you're there. Michael picked up all the costs, and he frequently brought people with him who were crippled. He brought children who were crippled. Remember, Gavin Avizio was supposed to die. He was sickly and in a hospital, died of brain cancer and other types of cancer, and the doctors had given him only, I think, 6 months left to live. That was the story we were told. Well, he got invited out to Neverland, and he was completely healed. He's gone to college since, and he still won't repent of his sin. And that's what, that's a hallmark of a saint. Michael was a living, breathing, dancing, singing saint. And we've never seen the likes of Michael Jackson before, and I doubt that we'll ever see a dancing, singing saint like Michael again. He was one of a kind.
I totally agree with you, and I want to go over to my guests, and I want to get their opinions on what you just said. First, let's start with Miss Geraldine Hughes, and then we'll go to Kerry. Geraldine, your thoughts on what Mr. Wagner just said? Geraldine?
Oh, I'm sorry. He is so on the money with everything. He was following it tooth and nail. And what I love about what Mr. Wagner did, it seemed like that Michael just strategically had people that were like on a mission if I can just say this and to give you a crystal clear definition of what I'm trying to say, like they were all on a heavenly mission to kind of like really, help come alongside of Michael, the innocent one, because I know God is not supporting a child molester, but if you are somebody that has been doing nothing but good, we go through trials, but we're not left alone. And what I love about what Mr. Wagner did, he always went straight to the heart of the problem. He's like, everything he said is so on point, it's so on target. And it's like, well, if he saw this, and this is a man that's not an African American. Come on now, we ain't talking race right now. We talking right and we talking wrong. We talking that this what they did to Michael was not right, and should not be done to anybody. But for somebody to come alongside with a third eye, let's put it like that, he just articulated, and not just that, he was always actively, aggressively going after that wrong person, and because he was stationed right out in Santa Barbara, he was not fearing nobody coming after him. He was just flat-footed, saying this is not right, and we need to actively, go after these people. And he hasn't changed his position yet. I just believe that, he's, God has put him on assignment. So I absolutely love meeting him. I love what he stood for. He stands for right. you know, and not afraid
Absolutely,
to
I
expose
totally
it.
agree.
Not afraid to expose
Totally agree
it.
with you. He did a great job. Kerry Anderson, give me your take, and then I want to ask you about the book.
Well, I think Mr. Wagner hit the nail right on the head. He was very accurate in everything he said. It's just amazing how these systems that are in place are supposed to be fair and equitable to everybody, but they're not. People can misuse their authority, and obviously they did. I think it's very important. Like you said, Mr. Snedden is deceased now, but those other characters that were involved in this conspiracy, and you talk about the prosecution was very problematic, and they should be held accountable. And I think God has a way, man, of just bringing everything that's in the dark to the light, and you're going to eventually pay for your wrongdoing. I don't know how, I don't know how long, but I think I tip my hat to Mr. Wagner, because when you start talking about things that he's talked about in the last few minutes, you also have to be concerned about the welfare of yourself and the welfare of your family. So I honestly hope that he's taking precautions in that area too. I don't know how serious these guys are about staying innocent, and I don't know where it is as relates to them filing charges or making that prosecutorial team they should be held accountable, you know, for what they did. I've never seen something like that. Some things like the rulings, and I actually don't know if, you know, judges can be sued as well, but I don't think so. But Judge Melville has some answering to do too on some of his rulings, and because he could have nipped all that stuff in the bud, he could have ruled against some of those things. And thank God for Susan Yu and Tom Mesereau and their team. They were just awesome, and I just thank God that ultimately justice prevailed. But I think one of the things that's happening now, it's through the judicial system as well as the law enforcement thing, and I know we'll probably get into that at a later time, but man, people are not taking certain things anymore, and people are not afraid, like Mr. Wagner, to bring these inconsistencies and these injustices to the light. Thank God for people like that, because, you know, most people, they know some of these injustices and these wrongdoings exist, but they always consider their family or their job or whatever, and it takes a person with some personal intestinal fortitude like Mr. Wagner to keep these people to the fire, you know, and let's get something happening on what they did, because they should be held accountable for the prosecutorial nightmare that they put on in court. It is unbelievable. I had never seen anything like that. I made comments to people that I was always proud to be in law enforcement because I did my job right. But when I saw what I saw in that trial go on from day one, I was like, you got to be kidding me. You know? Right. And it's like, and then the judge would rule on. I said, well, okay, this is black and white. I'm not an attorney, but I know that this is violating his rights. And I was waiting on Judge Melville, and it seems like everything that was against Mr. Jackson, he ruled in favor of the prosecution. Like, wow, this is going to be, and that's just why I told Michael, we had some very serious conversations to and from. I told him, I said, you know what? This is going to be bigger than you, bigger than Tom Mesereau and your money, because God is the only person that is going to get you out of this mess. When I saw all the rulings and it's like, because who can overrule a judge? Nobody. I think they're basically invincible as it relates to the natural world. Now, God is in charge of everything, but he'll pay. Just like Tom, I don't know about Tom Snedden and his last days. I'll take Mr. Wagner's word for it. He's never told me anything that he couldn't back up. But you eventually will reap what you sow, and those other guys, Zonin and that other part of that team, they should be held accountable. I really believe that. Right. You know. Right. So that's what I feel about it. I have the same sentiments as Ms. Hughes and Mr. Wagner.
mean, going on the Martin Bashir documentary, Living with Michael Jackson, years ago, and saying it's okay to share your bed with a child. I mean, don't you think in some senses most people are going to say, well, he kind of set himself up for that?
Well, let me explain to you what was said to me. Michael and I spoke about that, and he said, Corey, when I was a kid, I was denied not only a childhood, but I was denied love. When I reached out to hug my father, he didn't hug me back. When I was scared on an airplane, he didn't put his arm around me and say, Michael, don't worry, it's going to be okay. When I was scared to go on stage, he said, get your ass on that stage.
Good morning. At 12:05 today, Michael Jackson was taken into custody at the Santa Barbara airport.